In the year 79 AD, beneath the roaring crowds of Rome's greatest arena, a 19-year-old Dacian woman named Livia stood chained in darkness, listening to the thunder of 50,000 voices, celebrating the gladiator who had just slaughtered her brothers. What happened to her in the next 3 hours would become Rome's most carefully buried secret, a practice so brutal that even the empire's own chroniclers debated whether to record it. This is the story that Roman senators tried to erase from history, the dark reward that turned victory into a license for the unspeakable, and the truth about what spoils of war really meant when the sand turned red and the gates closed behind the champions. Before we unveil what happened in those underground chambers, hit that like button if you've ever wondered what really happened after the crowds went home. Subscribe because what comes next will fundamentally change how you see ancient Rome. Comment below, did Roman entertainment go too far, or was this simply the cost of empire? What you're about to hear is documented in the writings of Cassius Dio, verified by archaeological excavations beneath the Colosseum conducted in 2018, and corroborated by Senate records discovered in the Vatican archives. These aren't legends. These are the documented practices that Rome's elite considered entertainment, the arena of blood. Across the breadth of the Roman Empire in the 1st century AD, the Colosseum stood as humanity's monument to spectacle and savagery. The massive stone amphitheater, completed just 1 year earlier in 80 AD, could swallow entire armies into its belly. The air inside perpetually carried the metallic tang of blood, mixed with the acrid smell of animal waste and human sweat. Sand covered the arena floor, not for decoration, but to absorb the fluids that poured from dying men and beasts. Beneath that sand lay a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and chambers where Rome stored its most valuable commodities: the condemned, the captured, and the conquered. In the shadow of imperial triumph, gladiatorial games served a purpose beyond mere entertainment. They were political theater, religious ritual, and social control wrapped into one blood-soaked package. When General Marcus Antonius returned from crushing the Dacian rebellion in 78 AD, he brought with him not just gold and territory, but 847 prisoners, including 124 women from the tribal aristocracy. These weren't common peasants. They were daughters of chieftains, wives of warriors, priestesses of foreign gods. Rome didn't just defeat its enemies. It needed to humiliate them, to break their spirit so thoroughly that even the memory of resistance would die. The victors and the vanquished. Gaius Valerius Maximus, at 32 years old, stood 6 feet tall, a giant by Roman standards. His body was a canvas of scars, each one representing a fight survived, an opponent killed, a crowd satisfied. Born into slavery after his father's execution for debt, Gaius had spent 14 years in the arena. He'd killed 89 men in sanctioned combat. What he wanted most was the wooden sword, the rudis, that would grant him freedom. What he feared most was dying nameless, just another corpse dragged out by the hooks. But on this particular afternoon, in August of 79 AD, he just defeated the champion of the Dacian prisoners in front of Emperor Titus himself. His reward was standard for a gladiator of his rank: 500 denarii in gold, a laurel crown, and first choice of the captivi, the female captives. Livia was 19, with the distinctive dark hair and pale skin of the Dacian highlands. Before the Roman legions burned her village, she'd been betrothed to a warrior named Decebalus. She'd watched Roman soldiers cut him down 3 months earlier. Now she stood in a holding cell with 17 other women, all of them torn from their lives, their families slaughtered, their futures erased. She wanted nothing except to die with dignity. She feared becoming entertainment for the mob that had celebrated her people's destruction. That morning, a guard had told her she'd been selected for the afternoon spectacle. She didn't know what that meant. She was about to discover Rome's definition of mercy was far more terrifying than its definition of cruelty. The stakes of empire. What was at risk wasn't just individual lives, it was the very foundation of Roman psychological warfare. The empire had learned that physical conquest wasn't enough. To truly break a people, you had to destroy their symbols, corrupt their sacred traditions, and demonstrate that even their most protected, their women, were now Rome's playthings. This wasn't random cruelty. It was calculated dehumanization. The spectacle of powerlessness reinforced to every conquered nation. Resistance was futile and defeat was total. Little did they know that this particular day's events would eventually become so notorious that the Senate itself would be forced to intervene. The victor's choice. At precisely 3 o'clock, as shadows lengthened across the blood-soaked sand, the master of games descended into the hypogeum, the underground complex beneath the arena. In the torchlit corridor that smelled of damp stone and fear, he approached Gaius Valerius Maximus with a bronze tablet listing the available rewards. The gladiator's hands were still trembling from combat adrenaline, his muscles burning, his mind clouded by the proximity to death he'd just escaped. "The Emperor acknowledges your victory," the official intoned. "By imperial decree and ancient custom, you are entitled to the spoils of conquest. Select your reward." If only they had known that this routine transaction, repeated hundreds of times before, would set in motion a chain of events that would reach the Senate floor within a month. The tablet listed options: money, wine, a night in a proper bed, or what they called victoria carnalis, the carnal privilege of victory. For a slave who owned nothing, who could be killed on a whim, this represented one of the few moments of power in an otherwise powerless existence. Roman society not only permitted this, it celebrated it as the natural order. The conquered existed for the pleasure of the conqueror. That was the empire's logic, refined over centuries. The preparation. In the women's holding cell, a different kind of preparation was underway. Guards entered with buckets of water, not for drinking, but for washing. The women were scrubbed, their hair untangled, their torn clothing replaced with simple tunics. Livia watched as 2 attendants worked through the group systematically, examining each woman, making notes on wax tablets. One older woman, a priestess named Zelmoxis, who'd served in the Dacian Temple of the Sun, whispered the truth they all dreaded. "They're making us presentable for the games, or for after." The preparations were complete, but something else was being prepared. Something that would turn routine exploitation into a scandal that would echo through the centuries. In the amphitheater above, 50,000 spectators were settling in for the afternoon's secondary entertainment. Between major gladiatorial bouts, the arena masters staged what they called theatrical interludes, mock battles, hunts, and what Roman historians delicately termed mythological reenactments. These often included condemned prisoners forced to act out scenes from mythology, usually ending in actual death, dressed up as divine entertainment. But today's program had a special feature: the triumph of Rome over barbarian shame. The arena awaits. At 3:30, 20 Dacian women were led up through the underground elevator system, an engineering marvel designed to deliver fighters, animals, and props directly onto the arena floor through trapdoors. Livia emerged into blinding sunlight and deafening noise. The crowd's roar hit like a physical force. She could smell roasting meat from vendors, perfume from the aristocratic sections, and underneath that, the copper stink of dried blood on hot sand. What should have been a quick, brutal execution became something far more calculated. The women were arranged in a line while a herald announced their crimes: resistance to Roman authority, harboring rebels, refusing to acknowledge Roman gods. Then came the twist. They would be given a chance to earn mercy by fighting each other in pairs, armed with wooden swords while wearing torn clothing meant to maximize humiliation. The victors would be claimed by champions of Rome. The losers would die. If you're stunned discovering this level of calculated cruelty, hit that like button. The next part reveals how this entertainment became policy. The breaking point. The wooden swords were distributed. Livia gripped hers, feeling the rough grain against her calloused palm. Across from her stood Decebalus' sister, Kamasikis, a woman who'd taught Livia how to weave, who'd sung at her betrothed ceremony.
Their eyes met. The crowd screamed for blood. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly. The master of games raised his hand, dropped it. Neither woman moved. The crowd's roar shifted from excitement to confusion to anger. "Fight!" they screamed. "Barbarian cowards!" Missiles began raining down. Olive pits, chicken bones, refuse from the concession areas. Still, the women stood motionless, wooden swords at their sides. It was the most powerful act of resistance available to the powerless: refusal. For 90 seconds, the most powerful empire on earth was defied by two unarmed women standing still. Then the guards moved in. What should have been theater became brutal reality. Kamasikis was struck from behind with the flat of a gladius. She fell. The crowd cheered. Livia screamed and rushed to her side, dropping her wooden sword. The guards dragged them both away, not to execution, but to something the crowd found equally entertaining. The true horror revealed in the Hippotium. The administrative machinery of exploitation ground forward with bureaucratic efficiency. A scribe recorded in official ledgers 20 female captives, Dacian origin, processed for post-victory allocation. Another notation, 2 resistant, transferred to private chambers for champions' exclusive use as per tradition. What followed would be remembered as Rome's most efficient system of dehumanization, the absolute commodification of human beings. Livy and Kamasikis were separated. Each was taken to different chambers, small rooms with stone benches, iron rings set into walls, and doors that locked from the outside. The rooms were well lit, clean, and utterly terrifying in their mundane efficiency. This wasn't some dark dungeon of improvised horror. These were purpose-built spaces, part of the arena's architecture, as planned as the tunnels for lions or the elevators for gladiators. Gaius Valerius Maximus entered Livia's chamber at 4 o'clock. The door opened, eyes met, silence fell. He was still in his arena armor, blood not his own, splattered across his chest. She was backed against the far wall, weaponless, exhausted. Between them was the abyss of Roman law. He had every legal right to whatever he chose to do. She had no rights at all. She was property, spoils, a reward earned in blood. Historical records don't tell us what Gaius felt in that moment. Did he see a human being? Did he see a victory trophy? Did he question the system that made him both victim and perpetrator? We know only what happened next, recorded not by Gaius or Livia, but by a clerk processing routine paperwork. And then the unthinkable happened, the act of defiance. Gaius removed his helmet, set down his sword, sat on the stone bench, head in his hands. For 5 minutes, an eternity measured in heartbeats, he said nothing. Livia remained frozen, every muscle tensed for violence that didn't come. Finally, he spoke, in broken Dacian, learned from other prisoners. What was his name? Whose name? The man they made you watch die. Decebalus? The warrior I killed today? No, a different one. 3 months ago. Gaius nodded slowly. I killed a Decebalus today. Maybe a brother, maybe a cousin. Your people love that name. What followed was not the assault Rome's system expected, but a conversation between two people the empire had tried to strip of humanity. Gaius told her about his father, executed when Gaius was 9. Livia told him about her village burning. 2 hours passed. Guards checked twice, heard talking, assumed compliance, left them alone. At 6 o'clock, Gaius made a decision that would cost him everything. He stood, walked to the door, called for the guard. This woman is sick, he announced, contaminated. I reject her. Take her to the physician. It was the only loophole in the system. Diseased rewards could be refused and returned to general prisoner status. The lie was transparent. The guard knew it. But the system had its rules, and refusing a gladiator's claim was bureaucratically simpler than investigating his motives. Livia was removed to the medical holding area. The immediate consequence: she died anyway, 3 days later, not from violence, but from infection, a common death in Roman captivity. The medical holding area was overcrowded, unsanitary, and indifferent. The very mercy that spared her from one horror delivered her to another. Gaius never saw her again. He fought twice more that month, won both times, refused rewards both times. The empire held its breath. Rumors spread through the gladiatorial barracks. Maximus had gone soft, had converted to one of those strange Eastern religions that preached mercy, had been cursed by Dacian witchcraft. In truth, he'd simply remembered he was human. And then the storm broke, Rome's reckoning. On September 15th, 79 AD, Senator Quintus Aurelius Sempronicus stood before the Senate with a formal complaint. His nephew, a junior gladiator, had been beaten by his trainer for refusing the traditional rewards after victory. The nephew claimed he'd been inspired by Maximus's example. The trainer argued he was enforcing proper Roman values. The case was trivial, except that it forced the Senate to acknowledge publicly what everyone knew existed. According to accounts preserved in the Senate records, a heated debate ensued regarding the propriety of certain practices related to defeated female captives. That bland language concealed a brutal 4-hour argument about whether Rome's treatment of conquered women had crossed from acceptable cruelty into something that even hardened senators found excessive. The conservative faction, led by Senator Fabius, argued tradition. Our ancestors conquered their enemies utterly, body and soul. This made Rome great. The Reform faction, influenced by Stoic philosophy and pragmatic concerns about provincial rebellions, countered, we create martyrs and fuel resistance. Dead rebels can't breed more rebels, but traumatized survivors return home.
Stories that ignite generations of hatred. The decisive factor wasn't morality, it was politics. 3 separate provincial governors had reported increased rebellion activity, specifically citing Roman treatment of captive women as recruiting propaganda for anti-Roman resistance. The empire was hurting itself. The official response. On October 1st, 79 AD, the Senate passed what historians call the Lex Captigi, the law of captive women. Its provisions were narrow but revolutionary. Female prisoners of war could no longer be used as rewards in public spectacles. Private exploitation continued. The law didn't free anyone, but the public theater of humiliation ended. Enforcement was spotty. Many arena managers ignored it, but the principle was established. Even Rome had limits, at least in public. Gaius Valerius Maximus was granted his freedom 3 months later, not for mercy, but for winning 5 more consecutive fights. His final recorded act as a free man was purchasing and freeing one Dacian woman from slavery. Historical records list her name simply as Camisus. Whether she was the same woman who stood beside Livia in the arena remains unconfirmed, but strongly suspected. The hidden cost. Imagine Gaius's realization that his one act of mercy saved one woman for days, while accomplishing nothing for the thousands who came before or the hundreds who followed. The system was too vast, too embedded, too profitable to break. His gesture was drops in an ocean of blood. Imagine Livia's final hours, dying of infection in a crowded cell, knowing she'd been spared one horror only to succumb to another, knowing that in Rome's calculus, her death was too mundane to record. While the gladiators' unusual mercy became a footnote in Senate debates, the tragedy isn't that Rome was cruel. Cruelty defined ancient warfare. The tragedy is that Rome systematized it, bureaucratized it, turned human suffering into efficient entertainment with supply chains and record-keeping. Centuries later, in 2018, archaeologists from the University of Rome, led by Dr. Isabella Fortunato, excavated the hypogum beneath the Colosseum's eastern section. They discovered something the tourist maps don't show: a network of small rooms with iron rings set into walls, drainage channels cut into floors, and scratch marks on stone. Desperate fingers seeking purchase, seeking escape, seeking any proof they'd existed. Carbon dating and architectural analysis confirmed these rooms were original to the 880 construction, purpose-built, not later additions. They found pottery fragments